Welcome to Nowhere. I'm your host, Keegan Otwell. Alright, this episode, getting into something a little new, Joseph Lonsdale. Alright, I've been weirdly excited to do this episode because it's actually a crossover of these two kind of different worlds that I'm very passionate about, and that's homelessness, obviously, and then the tech industry. When I say I'm passionate, it's more of like crimes of passion, that kind of passion. So I've been, kind of what people would call a Luddite for a while, which is kind of wielded by tech people as an insult. But if you go back to, Luddites, the Luddites were people in England back when the textile industry, there was inventions that made it possible to get rid of a bunch of workers. And what the Luddites did was they went and smashed that new technology. A Luddite isn't someone who is necessarily anti all technology. A Luddite is someone who is anti-technology that takes advantage of the working class, sets society backwards, that enriches the rich, and doesn't really do anything for the working class, doesn't make our lives better in any way, and in some cases takes away our livelihoods entirely. So, I don't know, that's kind of my definition of that. But yeah, I've just got into reading sci-fi dystopia in high school, read some books. Existential Threat of Big Tech is a good one. Covers Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon. There's some other books. Lately it's been a lot of different podcasts, and I just keep finding new ones. They're all kind of tech critical podcasts. Tech Won't Save Us is the first one, and then more recently, the one that actually turned me on to Joseph Lonsdale. There's this kind of one mention about him and the Cicero Institute and homelessness. And that podcast is called Dystopia Now, which just started really with the Trump administration and was kind of started with seeing the Silicon Valley tech right kind of get really involved in our government, as we've seen with Elon Musk and Doge. So yeah, there's this idea where we're told we're more connected than ever. And there's also this parallel idea out there that, there's also this loneliness epidemic. And, I won't rant, we've all heard the phone bad, social media bad arguments before. And even I myself have kind of changed my opinion over time on social media because, it has just become kind of a de facto place where people organize and share information, especially with, what's been happening in Gaza. That's, how a lot of information and journalism has even gotten out of there. So, that's something, obviously there's, still fucking a bunch of issues with the companies that run these social media platforms, but I see how it's necessary, and it's obviously not going anywhere anyways. But these days, I'm much more interested in the tech right and the billionaires that are attempting to impose their ideologies onto our world. I also want to be clear, this isn't a problem that is new or unique to, if you want to call it conservatism or authoritarianism. Neoliberals have been more than happy to work with companies like Palantir over the years and let the tech industry become totally enmeshed into our entire military structure and even basic government infrastructure. These things have been built up during liberal administrations, and the powers of these companies left unchecked has led to the moment we find ourselves in right now. And yeah, so I just kind of want to give some background because I find it necessary, and because, these people are all aligned in one way or another, and a lot of these people come from the same background. I'm just going to kind of give a background about the ideologies of the tech elite, who seek to rule our country and are ruling, you could argue. So you might have heard of the PayPal Mafia. All right, that's Peter Thiel, Elon Musk. Money that came out of PayPal created this group of people that have invested in each other's different things over the years, and it's this kind of network that is really wielding a lot of their power right now, Elon Musk being one of the major ones of that, who was actually bought out of PayPal because he was being super annoying. Really wanted PayPal to change their name to X. Curtis Yarvin is also a name that needs to be mentioned. Curtis Yarvin has kind of created a lot of the philosophical groundwork that these people have based their ideologies and their goals and stuff on. And this is called the Dark Enlightenment, which sounds promising, right? It's the Dark Enlightenment. Like, it sounds really good for everyone. But yeah, so Curtis Yarvin, he got his clout from being a blogger in the early 2000s, which is the first red flag. The second being his pen name that kept his identity secret for some time, Mencius Moldbug, which, you know, I'm not even going to look up what that's a reference to. I just don't care. The name, though, it fits. It sounds exactly like how he looks. Like, if you look up a picture of him, it's like, you don't even have to. It's just like when you hear that name, Mencius Moldbug, that's what Curtis Yarvin looks like. So yeah, Yarvin, he's been kind of heralded as like a literal prophet among the far right in Silicon Valley. You know, his ideas on the most basic level is that a democracy is a failed system, essentially. The idea is that we need to run the country like a startup is run. Like, move fast, break things, no regulation. We need a CEO instead of a president. Does that sound familiar? You know, it might look like exactly what's been happening in the U.S. Yeah, Peter Thiel himself, Thiel is really a godfather with a lot of this stuff, and he's funded a lot of politicians. He's tried to get different people in power over the years. One of those people is actually J.D. Vance, who was very aligned with Silicon Valley. Yeah, this stuff has really been years in the making. Nothing new, it's just that they've gotten into more power and they've been able to really inflict themselves on our world in a very real way. So, you know, these people, they used to call themselves libertarians. That was kind of the safe bet, safe play for them ideologically, front-facing way, because, you know, if you're a libertarian, it's like, don't tax me. I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want the government to have any effect on what I'm doing. Like, I'm going to go do my thing and just fucking leave me alone. Now, a lot of them have come out as, like, pure techno-fascists. Obviously, they wouldn't call themselves that, but some of them are self-ascribed monarchists, literally talking about having a king. You know, if these people really got their way, we'd be living in what would essentially be a feudal state. But on that note, this whole idea that came out of Curtis Yarvin and some other people is this idea of working towards building a network state. And this first started in the early 2000s with the Cicero Institute. The idea was to get away from society and build their own little tech utopia, little world where they could really just do things their own way and create the form of government that they wanted to have. So this is their first idea, is to get away from society, right? It's to build their own version, free from rules and taxation, you know? But then they realize, like, no one wants to live in the fucking ocean on an oil rig, you know? And then the idea after that was colonizing space, which you can put money into it, but it's like, that's not viable. That's not a viable option right now. So the next idea when you see people writing about the network state is, if you can't do this, which, like, people have gone to other countries and, like, put so much money in that they kind of take it over, because that's what this next idea is if you can't create your own network state off by yourself, is that you take an existing government and you turn that into a network state. Yeah, that's kind of what we've been seeing. This idea about the network state, you know, it's like government should be controlled by a CEO and shareholders. There shouldn't be a president, which I'm sure sounds very familiar, but if we go to literally thenetworkstate.com, in one sentence, they describe the concept of a network state as a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing state. Yeah, a lot of good words in there. Collective action. They have some very, in a lot of this language you'll see they're talking about, like, here it says, that is, if the nation-state system starts with a map of the globe and assigns each patch of land to a single state, the network state system starts with the 7+ billion humans of the world and attracts each mind to one or more networks. These concepts of, like, how the world should be run kind of enacted by these, like, rich white men. And, you hear them talk here and there about how this is for everyone and it's for the benefit of everyone. But that never really gets fleshed out, and when they're asked directly how any of these ideas would benefit, the working class, you'll hear them talk about, well, this isn't about right now. We're talking about thousands of years in the future, millions of years about, and I'll get into long-termism a little bit with that background. That's really what this is all about. It just comes down to running the government like you would a company. Which is, that's kind of what Donald Trump got elected on, Everyone said he's a good businessman, so why don't we run the country like a business? And this all aligns perfectly with that ideal. So, yeah. All right, I won't get too bogged down in this, but I think you guys kind of understand the concept. This is the Dark Enlightenment. These people kind of fly under the banner of TESCREAL, which is letters TESCREAL, which is transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, modern cosmism, rationality, effective altruism, and long-termism. Those last two is really what you hear about the most, and the most outspoken people are effective altruists. You also hear of accelerationism, which isn't in here, but a lot of people transcribe to, including Joseph Lonsdale, although he might not say it outwardly. Accelerationist is essentially saying that we need to sprint forward as quickly as we can on a technological level, with AI, other technology, and building bigger data centers. And it's all kind of agreeing that this is not going to be good for the environment, but that we need this technology in order to survive and get to another level. When you tie all this stuff up together, especially with the transhumanism aspect, you could rightly argue that some of these people are actually extinctionists. They talk about, with effective altruism, let me get into effective altruism a little bit. So this is one of the good ones, right? It sounds good, right? How to be effective with your donations. How can your money have the greatest positive effect? All right, if you donate to a charity in Africa that provides mosquito nets or malaria medication, how many lives are you saving? So you can take your money, you can kind of see and break it down to how many lives does it save. Effective altruism, you start to get into some territory where they're like, but wait, let's say these people that live in Africa go on to have maybe less productive lives that contain a lot of suffering. Maybe that money could be better spent trying to save lives in the US, where the lives you save might have a more total positive effect on the world. This is how they put it. This is not me saying that, but, you kind of see we're already in fucking dicey territory. Really, once you get into effective altruism, the issue is that you're trying to place a value on a human life. Once you're trying to do that, you're automatically devaluing other human life. Once you value human life, you're trying to quantify human suffering, you're automatically going to be devaluing other human life. And these people really get into some fucking you have already engaged in a form of, like, soft eugenics, where you're accepting that some people should be saved, some shouldn't, and that some life might be better off to not exist at all because it will just perpetuate more suffering. And you hear from that Dystopia Now, the academic host, it's an academic and a comedian, but the academic actually was big in these communities, rubbed shoulders with a lot of these people, and wrote a lot of literature. And he talked about these people and being in person. And once you really start talking to effective altruists, the idea of eugenics is a popular talking point among these people. Yeah, and it's like you'll see this over and over where it's just like you have this very small percentage of rich tech people who think that they know how the entire world should be run. So yeah, you get this effective altruism idea tied up with long-termism. And so philosopher William McCaskill defines long-termism as the view that positively influencing the long-term future is a key moral priority of our time. Yeah, it sounds good again, right? Like all these things sound good on the surface. Like, yeah, long-termism, like that sounds great. We're always focused on the short term, There's 4-year presidential terms, 2-year Congress term. Everyone's focused on the short term. Long term is good, right? But when you get these two tied together, what the ideas a lot of these people have is with long-termism, you're looking at the possible technological advancements that we could have. And because they think that there is a small chance, and they agree there's a small chance, that we can create an artificial general intelligence or a super intelligence that is advanced enough to essentially, once this comes about, it's like the singularity idea, where it's like once we hit that level, that our technological advancement will explode upward exponentially, and that it will fix all of our problems, and that we will become an off-planet species. And like you'll hear Elon Musk talks about this almost really religious idea of spreading consciousness into the stars. And that word consciousness is important because these people aren't talking about getting human lives off planet. They're talking about consciousness. And this is where the transhumanism comes in, because, what they believe is that the fact that they think in the future, 1,000 or million years or whatever, that we can be off planet and turn entire other planets into data centers that could possibly house trillions of perfectly happy digital beings. And because on an effective altruist level, we're talking about trillions of lives, right? Well, trillions of lives, that's more important than, 8 billion lives that are here now? So, yeah, global warming's gonna happen, sure. But because there's a small chance that we could achieve this future, it's okay that climate catastrophe is gonna happen. Not to mention that when it does happen, when the first heat waves hit that are 37 degrees Celsius, at a level where your body can no longer cool itself, that's all going to happen in Pakistan, India, near the equator. Those are going to be the people that suffer, It's like we have to remember that all these fucking people have bunkers, They're prepared to live out the apocalypse. When you really break down these ideas, or you get into them and you talk about them with other people, it all sounds absurd because it is absurd. It's these people think they're using rationality and logic to essentially make excuses for hoarding all of their wealth, for being the ones who are in power and who decide what happens to our world because they think they know better than everyone else. And that's really what this comes down to. And that's why we're going to get into Joe Lonsdale right now, who's one of these. All right, so a little bit of history on Joe Lonsdale. 2003. Joe Lonsdale co-founded Palantir with Peter Thiel, which I'm sure you've heard of, mentioned before from the PayPal Mafia. This is also a common theme you'll see with a lot of these companies. They pull terms from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series. So the Palantir in Lord of the Rings is an all-seeing orb used by the dark wizard Saruman. So yeah, maybe a little bit too much on the nose, but pretty much a really good name for this company, because Palantir is all up in our government. They're based in surveillance, among other things. And this was really one of the first Silicon Valley tech companies to become intertwined with the American military, government, and intelligence agencies. And they are deep, deep in it. To pick from, all right, AI-powered automation for every decision. which I'll fucking get into that. Defense, commercial, industrial. They have Palantir Foundry, Palantir Gotham, and Palantir Apollo. Gotham, I think, is in England. They're all over the world now. They're in government infrastructure. They're in our military. They're here. Palantir's AI-fueled Titan trucks are rolling into U.S. Army hands. The Army now has a few tactical intelligence targeting access nodes, state-of-the-art trucks that promise to streamline the battlefield process of spotting, tracking, and blasting. So these guys really were at the cutting edge, and they were kind of some of the first people who showed Silicon Valley that there is another route to success and to power. And it doesn't necessarily have to be through commercial software that's available to the public. If you can get intertwined with the American military and access that defense spending, which remember, this year the Pentagon is spending $1 trillion on the defense budget, which is the highest it's ever spent. A lot of that money is going to companies like Palantir, and it's really all just intertwined with the tech elite that are in control. I won't say in control, but they're in power right now. Let's just focus on one of the most recent things that Palantir has done, just to kind of get a little taste of what this company does. So they paired with the IDF, and they offered them novel AI services that gave the IDF the ability to generate targets in Gaza. So it's like Gen AI, but, instead of creating some slop like pictures of shrimp Jesus, it uses a database to decide where bombs are dropped. And this removes the human element from the decision to bomb women, children, and innocent men, while also automating targets in a way that increases the amount of targets they can attack. Pretty much just like baseline evil tech shit, what article it was, but there's a literal IDF guy quoted in it saying that it's like a target automation factory. After having success in the genocide in Gaza, these tech companies can take their battle-tested software and say, hey, look how well this worked. Alright. Joseph Lonsdale. Time to get into the Cicero Institute. So, Joseph Lonsdale and the Cicero Institute. Palantir, co-founder, billionaire, part of a venture capitalist firm called 8VC, getting a lot of money out of that. And the Cicero Institute is essentially a large right-wing think tank affecting legislation across America. How a lot of this started was Joseph Lonsdale lived in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and he wasn't happy with the issue of homelessness in San Francisco. Really took issue with pretty much having to see people living on the street. This idea, he did a lot of affecting local legislation there too, and you'll see over the years, he's been working on this stuff for since 2020 at least, with the Cicero Institute on a national level. But what we're going to focus on is their quote-unquote solutions for homelessness. This is how they describe themselves: as a public policy organization drawing on extensive experience in government, legislation, and the law, technology, and entrepreneurship, we develop and advocate for bold state-level policies and challenging issues to restore liberty through accountability and transparency in American governance. We do this because government bureaucrats shouldn't come between you and your American dream. Whew, fuck. God. Giving me goosebumps. Cicero Institute. From day one, the Cicero Institute has been tearing down bureaucratic roadblocks, ripping up the red tape, and introducing bold solutions to our nation's most challenging problems. And I'm reading that over a little animation of an American flag waving in the background. Really beautiful. Alright, so here they got some really good statistics. So in 2024, 116 pieces of legislation were informed by Cicero research, and 38 of those were signed into law. 300 pieces of legislation have been informed by Cicero research since our founding. 90 bills containing Cicero recommendations have been signed into law. Yeah, they have involvement in healthcare, public safety, which is prison and parole systems, and then homelessness. A lot of this is pitched in a way where they're always helping, right? So, homelessness. For 2 decades, misaligned policies that forsake rehabilitation have gotten in the way of human flourishing and put public safety at risk. Outcomes-based approaches to homelessness alleviation encourage programs to offer services that help individuals achieve independence and escape life on the streets. Instead of doubling down on failed housing-first policies, states must take bold steps to demand transparency and accountability when it comes to homeless funding. Alright, and that last little fucking sentence there is a real big one. Instead of doubling down on failed housing-first policies. Alright, so that is what it all comes down to right there. They are trying to remove housing first policy, which through countless fucking studies has shown is the only way to decrease homelessness. Because how the fuck do you help homelessness? You create more fucking homes, and you get people in them before you force them to go through treatment or do any of this other shit. They have this homelessness policy model language, which is a PDF on their website, which is a model bill. It's a cut and paste legislation to be introduced on a state level anywhere. This is one of the first states was Missouri, and this was Missouri House Bill 1606, which is the Reducing Street Homelessness Act. Let's look at a little bit of this language to see how they talk about it, because it sounds real good. Purpose. This act will reallocate existing state homelessness and other funding to counteract the burgeoning homeless crisis in parentheses state, so whatever state you have, you just fucking slap it in there. Alright, this is the anti-housing first thing. State funds that may otherwise be used for the construction of permanent housing for the homeless shall be used to assist such individuals with substance use, mental health treatment, and other services, including short-term housing. By that they mean shelters. The department shall provide up to, in parentheses, 25% of the base allocation of such funds as performance payments to political subdivisions or not-for-profit organizations providing such services as rewards for meeting predetermined goals. So what they're trying to do is they want no money to be used for the construction of permanent housing, and they want that money to go towards assisting individuals with substance use and mental health treatment. I mean, the kind of crux of this and what's so fucked up about it is you can't help individuals with substance use and mental health while they're still on the street. You can try to, but it's like running on a fucking treadmill. The act of being homeless and living outside takes up so much of your life that you don't have time to do these things or engage in these programs. And if you are engaged in them, living outside, if you have mental health, being homeless, it can create this like feedback loop where your mental health is getting worse because you're homeless, and your substance use is, bad because you're living on the street. So housing first is about get these people in houses, get them in housing, and then we can address that stuff. And that's what has been shown to work. So this whole legislation and all of this bullshit is a criminalization of homelessness. They want officers, it talks in here about enforcement. Use of state lands. No person shall be permitted to use state or local government-owned lands for unauthorized sleeping, camping, or long-term shelters. Any violation of this shall be a Class C misdemeanor. Really, it's just a few pages of legislation that can be taken and used, and it has been. This has been going on in Austin, Texas, which just happens to be where he lives. November of 2020 is when he moved his family, 8VC, and the Cicero Institute from the Bay Area to Austin, Texas. In an opinion editorial published in the Wall Street Journal, he cited California's quote-unquote bad policies that discourage business and innovation, worsening public safety, high taxes, and a deteriorating quality of life as the prime factors in his decision. But yeah, talked about an intolerant far left. Silicon Valley and local government in San Francisco has been butting heads because it's San Francisco. There's a lot of fucking leftists there. but Silicon Valley has put so much fucking money. Politicians, the money they put into people there is just like insane. So Vox has this good article that I will put in the show notes also, is entitled Groups Confront Billionaires Institute Pushing Laws Criminalizing Homelessness. Cicero-backed legislation resulted in Supreme Court grants pass decision. It's just like, how comically evil do you have to be to have billions of dollars and use that to enact your will on one of the most marginalized populations in our entire country? Yeah, it's just fucking disgusting, man. White fucking frat boys. Oh my god. It just fucking boils my blood. This is all a little side note, but, this is why I kind of want to do the whole background on this episode, because this is shit that has just been running through my brain. Anyways, so we get into this article. So this article is written by Carol Riley at the People's Tribune, Austin, Texas. Low-income people are organizing to fight for their rights, including the right to shelter. So this organization, Vocal, which is Voices of Community Activists and Leaders, started over 20 years ago in New York City. And so there's like Vocal NY, Vocal Kentucky, Vocal Texas, and Vocal Texas is based out of Austin, Texas. So these people represent people affected by AIDS, by the opioid epidemic, by mass incarceration, by homelessness. So Vocal TX, along with the Austin, and this is from the article, Vocal TX, along with the Austin Justice Coalition, held a Fight Back Against Billionaires forum recently to criticize legislation that bans camping and criminalizes homeless people. Targeted was a local billionaire, Joe Lonsdale, noted for pushing legislation that criminalizes public camping. That legislation passed in some cities and states. Lonsdale contributed $40,000 to the Save Austin Now super PAC, which reinstated an Austin camping ban. He also worked on a statewide camping ban signed by Texas Governor Greg Abbott that included penalties for cities that don't enforce the ban. The passage of Cicero-backed legislation grants pass Oregon that was challenged in lower courts was then referred to the Supreme Court, resulting in the decision known as grants pass, which ruled that cities can punish unhoused people for sleeping in public, even if they have nowhere else to go. Since then, we have seen the ever-increasing cruel policies that sweep up people's life possessions when quote-unquote illegal tent encampments are found, turning people without shelter into criminals. The homeless organization Invisible People says that the Cicero Institute sample legislation is adopted by politicians under the radar, many voters who don't realize the harm it pushes for. Quote, voters who would be appropriately horrified don't realize how bad it is because the language seems benign at first glance. End quote. The Cicero Institute has a fund to develop very sophisticated PR to mislead voters into supporting legislation that prioritizes drug and mental health treatment, which sounds good, right, for homeless people instead of spending money to build housing for low-income and homeless people. However, Housing First, a successful program supported by homeless leaders, has been shown to be a program that works. After the rally, protesters were bussed to the Cicero Institute headquarters, where the victims of Cicero presented their statement, which said in part, quote, Joe Lonsdale, you make your profit off the pain of poor people by pushing policies that keep us homeless. We see through your lies. We refuse to be treated like criminals because the cost of housing and living is so high, and we refuse to let the billionaire agenda win. Lonsdale stands to profit from these criminalization of homeless policies as a major investor in the private prison industry. The billionaire class must be stopped in their drive to impose their power over our lives. Makes all of this sense if we go back and we look at the Cicero Institute's website, because another big part of what this institute does, because what you're doing is creating a cycle for a lot of these people to have these constant interactions with police. Yeah, so it's just, you really start to get into this stuff, you peel back any of these fucking layers, and it's really just like, pure fucking evil. It really is. Alright, so I'm going to go into one more article that does a really good job of outlining everything that is fucked up that the Cicero Institute has been doing. This article is from the website In These Times, and is by Rebecca Burns. Alright, so this is going to be the last article, and then I'll finish this out with a little conclusion. I'm not going to read the whole article, but here's some excerpts. A co-founder of the surveillance technology firm Palantir, who decamped to Austin from San Francisco in 2020, Lonsdale denounces the Marxist idea that American capitalism causes homelessness, and that only far-left activism can fix it. The Cicero Institute has helped transform homelessness policing from a niche fixation of a segment of Silicon Valley into a rallying cry in the culture war, bringing new levels of both visibility and cruelty to the issue. Vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance repeated the Cicero Institute's talking points at a Senate hearing last year, and some of the group's preferred measures are included in Project 2025, the conservative blueprint for a second Trump term. So this was obviously written before the second Trump term and he's in office and these things are happening. Those measures include eliminating funding for the kind of permanent supportive housing assistance that's helping Jones, a person from the article, get back on his feet in Austin. At least 100 cities nationwide already have laws on the books prohibiting sleeping or lying down in public space. But in the Cicero Institute's approach, advocates see something more alarming: a push to defund long-term solutions and instead force municipalities to sweep the housing affordability crisis under the rug. Template state legislation authored by the group allows a fine of up to $5,000 for repeat violations of camping bans, and it makes it easier to commit people to psychiatric institutions. And it talks about how it punishes cities who don't do it, which we talked about a little. Elements of the group's cut and paste bills have now been introduced in 15 states and passed in 8. And yeah, this is at the time of this article. I believe it's more than that now. Yeah, so, we talked about it a little bit, but the fact that Lonsdale just so happens to have investments in private prisons is also very fucking sketchy when it comes to criminalizing homelessness and creating avenues through which more people can end up in prison. Through a little bit, and then talk about Austin again a little bit. Austin housing activists launched a campaign to repeal the ordinance. At a 16-hour city council meeting in 2019, unhoused residents testified about friends who drowned while sleeping in creek beds or tunnels in order to evade the ban. The city council voted to decriminalize sleeping and camping in most public spaces so long as the public right-of-way remained clear. The change triggered an immediate backlash from business owners and conservative activists in Austin, and an escalating feud between city officials and Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who also just so happens that the governor's former chief of staff is a senior advisor to 8VC, the venture capitalist firm that Lonsdale is. That is his firm. Also, Abbott, the governor's daughter, is 8VC events coordinator, which sounds like a job that was just given as a favor. Because, that's how this shit works. Alright, skipping a little bit, and then just a month after testifying before the Texas legislature in support of Abbott's statewide ban, Judge Glock, a senior advisor at the Cicero Institute, testified virtually at an April 2021 hearing in Tennessee. State lawmakers were considering legislation that made unauthorized camping on local public land, like parks, a felony offense, and Glock testified that such penalties could provide the extra push unhoused individuals needed to accept help. So, making it a felony is totally ridiculous. If people who are sleeping outside, who are just homeless, are getting felonies, then you're literally just at that point, a felony offense is like burglary or like aggravated battery. Sleeping outside becoming a felony would be would just be putting poor people in prison for being poor at that point. And, it didn't say it passed, but this is what's being considered in Tennessee. This is what they want. Glock testified that such penalties could provide the extra push unhoused individuals needed to accept help. Alright, but I'll include this article in the show notes. Alright, here's another excerpt that's really good from this article. This month, advocates are bracing as a sweeping criminalization law takes effect in Kentucky. The law contains standard Cicero Institute elements, including a reduction of the requirements to involuntarily commit someone to a psychiatric facility, plus a frightening addition, an expansion of the state's stand your ground law to include unlawful camping among offenses that could justify deadly force. so that that stand your ground law is laws that make it possible for citizens to shoot people. And they're talking about including this with people experiencing homelessness who are camping outside, that you just get to shoot them, I guess, is how that works, because they're outside and you're outside and they're there and you have a gun. So, I mean, well, you got to shoot them, I guess. Not much explanation on that, but that could, here, this article continues, that could set the stage for vigilante violence against unhoused people, says Eric Tars, Senior Policy Director at the National Homelessness Law Center, who adds, these laws are morphing, evolving, and getting more harmful. Kentucky has expanded the state's stand your ground law to include unlawful camping among offenses that could justify deadly force. Meanwhile, this spring, Florida passed legislation hailed by Lonsdale as a homelessness revolution. He met personally with Republican lawmakers from the state, including House Speaker Paul Renner at a Napa winery last week, according to correspondence obtained in these times through a public records request. These bills are being put in place. Funding is being cut, rents going up, and the solution is to criminalize anyone who ends up on the streets as a result. When the common issue in all of this is there's not enough affordable housing for everyone who needs it. And that is Misha Smith saying that. She's the Affordable Housing Policy Manager for the group Empower Missouri, who a lot of the stuff with especially Cicero Institute's legislation has been happening in Missouri. Yeah, so that's that last article. Rebecca Burns in these times, and alright, and that was published in August 13th of 2024, so obviously this is before Trump took office again. So, you know, before these people got even more power. The fact that Joe Lonsdale and his company 8VC have investments in private prisons and push legislation to end housing first initiatives that keep homeless people off the street is sketchy as fuck. I keep asking myself why. Why does a billionaire who can spend his time doing whatever he wants focus so much of his energy on making life harder for homeless people? Why does Elon Musk pay someone to play video games for him? I don't fucking know. If anyone is subhuman, it's these sociopathic billionaires. They're so removed from actual human life and the realities of struggling to survive that maybe Lonsdale has convinced himself he is changing the world for the better. This man helped create Palantir, a company that is complicit in genocide. The truth is, these people enjoy expressing their power. They love to be able to shape the world around them, like clay in their hands. Money is never good enough. They want true power, and they are closer than ever to attaining some of their decades-long goals laid out by the fucking Dark Enlightenment. Money is nothing more than a substrate for gaining power. These people are narcissists, sociopaths, and they are convinced that they know how the entire world should be run. For some reason, Joseph Lonsdale is trying to perpetuate the criminalization of poor people. He wants cities to design camps where homeless people are forced to live that are ruled over by police, which sounds like outdoor prisons. And he tells everyone, I think even including himself, that he is trying to change the world for the better. But what has already happened? People experiencing homelessness in Austin have drowned in tunnels trying to avoid the police. These laws are designed to extend the punishment bureaucracy's power, not the justice system, because that's an oxymoron. This actually leads pretty neatly into the next episode I'll be doing in this style, which is about the book Propaganda by Alex Karakatsanis? I don't know. Yeah, that book lays out how the media has become complicit through incentives to push fear-mongering stories and make crime in cities seem much worse than it actually is, creating the anecdotes needed to further the budgets of police and to open more prisons, while also putting fear of poor people into the middle and working class. These are narratives that have always been pushed by people in power. This is part of a systemic battle in which the ruling class wants to extend their powers over controlling the poor, the working class, while shrinking the middle class as they consolidate more wealth. If you want my opinion, I think people like Joe Lonsdale are scared. They are terrified of the fact that they are outnumbered. They are trying to create the foundational infrastructure necessary to keep poor people down and keep them from ever being able to organize and fight back. By trying to make it a felony to be homeless and pass stand your ground laws, they make it easier for police and even citizens to kill homeless people and enact more violence towards them. And we have the studies, we know it works. Even Lonsdale knows what works. He's not dumb, but he doesn't want it to work. He doesn't want homeless people to get off the street. He wants to perpetuate a cycle of systematic hurting, numbering, and locking up within the system of poor people, putting people experiencing homelessness in outdoor internment camps or creating laws that put them in prison. This battle will always be one of class and power. You cannot talk about homelessness without talking about billionaires and those in power. It's a matter of survival, and it is us or them. So yeah, I'm sure this won't be the last time I talk about Lonsdale on here. This is an ongoing struggle, and it's playing out in many places across the U.S. where the Cicero Institute is trying to pass these laws. So I think I'll definitely be looking at cities where that's taking place, and I hope to interview some of the people who are trying to fight back against those in those cities. So yeah, thanks for listening to another episode of Nowhere. I've been on vacation, but I've managed to get this episode out, hopefully. I have at least 3 other episodes in the work, as well as some investigative articles I'm working on, and I'm hoping to start bringing in a co-host after I get back and this summer, and start kind of creating new style of episodes through that format. We'll see. Yeah, a format that'll have a little bit more levity than this other stuff. And if you want to support the podcast, just subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends and enemies. Alright, so stay tuned. More episodes soon.